The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back. Lovin' baseball when we were 12 and innocent. My guest today is a Comfortably Zoned regular, Mr. Jeff Kallman. How are you, sir?
I am good. How are you doing?
Oh, good. You've got the voice of God. How about that? Did you ever have
He'll be surprised to hear that I stole his voice.
Well, no, he'll be surprised to be woken up on a day like this. He's busy napping. But you have somewhere in your background there was some public address stuff going on. Has to be. You can't hold that kind of talent back.
I did do radio for the better part of 5 years in the 1990s.
Oh, didn't know that. Tell me about your experience. What station? What city?
I was a news anchor and reporter for a public radio station way upstate New York, and then for a time on WZAD, which was an oldies station out of Wurtsboro, and then for KUBA in Yuba City, California.
Whoa. I lived in
around
Sacramento.
A little bit.
I lived in Sacramento for a portion of my life, and I spent some time up in Yuba City, Marysville. There was an Air Force base up there.
That was Air Force Base. Oh, no, Beale. I'm sorry, Beale.
Yeah. So I had no idea. Didn't know you had California roots, so to speak.
Well, I did that for a while, and then after that I did trade journalism in Southern California for about 7 years.
Whoa. So the voice came in handy one way or the other, and it still does. This is a pleasure to hear you again on the Comfortably Zoned airwaves.
Good to be back.
I have a topic, and it seems to have been seems to get approval from my guests. I'd like you to take yourself back to when you were 12 years old, and what was baseball like for you? What were some of the things that you experienced for the first time that impressed you? And tell me about it, Jeff Kallman.
Well, I had baseball experience before I was 12. I'd gone to several Mets games, both at the Polo Grounds and Shea Stadium. Once it was with my day camp. This, I believe, was in 1965. And one thing I remember vividly, other than the Mets losing to the St. Louis Cardinals, was waiting for the buses to come take us back to camp. And while we were waiting, Lindsey Nelson, the broadcaster, came out, and a whole bunch of us swarmed him for autographs. And he was very nice about it. He was very engaging, very polite, and very friendly. And he wasn't wearing those garish sport jackets yet.
Oh, they came within time, believe me. And
yeah, he did not have those patchwork jacket blazers that he became famous for just yet.
Right, and I saw some pictures of the three of them, Ralph Kiner, Bob Murphy.
Nelson and Bob Murphy, yeah.
Right, and the jackets spread. I saw a picture with all three of them in Gar's jackets, and just got to remember the voices. That's who was your favorite announcer when you grew up? Was it Lindsey?
Oh, I like Lindsey Nelson and Bob Murphy. The only reason I ever listened to Yankee games was to listen to Red Barber.
Well,
at least until he got fired after the 1966 season.
With the Dodgers for not backing up on O'Malley on something, sponsoring the World Series.
Well, I've read about that. Barber ran into trouble when the Gillette Razor Company, which sponsored the World Series in the years that the Dodgers were making their annual runs for the pennant, would not raise his World Series pay, and Barber stood his ground, and Walter O'Malley wouldn't back him up. So Barber decided to quit, and the Yankees hired him immediately.
Yes. And that Yankee broadcast team of Mel Allen, Red Barber, and the upcoming Phil Rizzuto was perhaps my favorite of all. And I've listened to some great announcers all these years.
Well, Barber was the best of them.
Barber was
even then. He was certainly the most courageous of them. I have never forgotten I think it was the next to last Yankee home game of 1966. That was the year the Yankees finished dead last. And Barber, during the game, noticed that the crowd was only about 400 and something people, and he ordered a camera pan around the ballpark. When the camera crew directors refused it, Barber told his viewers the actual paid crowd, and then he said, "It's the smallest crowd in the history of Yankee Stadium, and this crowd is the story, not the game."
Whoa.
And he was rewarded for that with his head on a plate, because he had no idea that one of the 400-something people in the ballpark was the CBS executive who was assigned to oversee the Yankees, Mike Burke.
Mike Burke, who later bought the Yankees. And
Burke did not buy the Yankees. CBS owned the Yankees until George Steinbrenner's group bought them.
Whoa. Why did I think, I guess Burke ran the Yankees. How about that?
He ran the Yankees for CBS, but Burke knew about as much about running a baseball team as the Beatles knew about playing the game.
Okay. Tell me about Rizzuto in the booth. I thought he was charming. This is
he was fun, but I think Red Barber was the better baseball announcer by a wide margin.
No question.
But I won't give Rizzuto credit for this. I read a story about him that when the Yankees decided to hire him for their broadcast team, the first thing he did was to go to Red Barber and say, "Can you teach me everything you know?"
Whoa.
So I respected Rizzuto for that.
That's before Red Barber was with the Yankees.
No, it was when Red Barber. It was when Red Barber was with the Yankees.
Okay,
I think it happened 2 years. I think it happened 2 years after Barber joined the Yankees.
Okay, I thought Barber was still with them until '56.
No, he left well before that.
Okay.
He left after the 1953 World Series.
Okay. Well, let me, this comes to mind, speaking of Rizzuto being fun. On YouTube, if you just check it out, there are old-time Yankee broadcasts, radio broadcasts, of the 50s.
Oh God, there are a lot of old radio broadcasts on YouTube. A lot of games that people would not imagine the broadcasts to have survived, but they're there. One of the ones that I caught on to, and it led to me writing a piece for the Society for American Baseball Research's Games Project, was the final home game of the Washington Senators. In fact, the final game of the Senators, period. And it stands out, A, because the Yankees were the opponent in Washington, and B, because the game ended up being a forfeit to the Yankees because the fans rioted during the ninth inning when Horace Clarke was coming up to the plate against Joe Grisenda.
And this was the second Washington franchise.
The ones who have since been known as the Texas Rangers.
Right. And that's another story. A man named Cook took them away.
Wrong, Bob Short.
Bob Short, not Cook. You're absolutely
As a matter
right.
of fact, the most frequently seen banners around RFK Stadium that day happen to have Short's initials on them.
Oh, okay.
There was a lot of outrage over how Short managed to get the Senators out of town after he had driven the franchise practically into the ground.
Tell me that story.
He basically bought the Senators on spec, for want of a better way to phrase it. When the Senators showed up in the pennant race for quite a long period of 1969, he jacked up his prices, continuously claimed that he couldn't afford to keep the team in Washington, even though he was the one who had made it impossible for them to survive because of a whole bunch of very squirrely arrangements and a bunch of very dubious deals. And yet publicly he'd sworn he was not going to move the team. But at about the 11th hour, there was a buyer who was ready to keep the team in Washington. The problem was he didn't want to be forced to make up his mind immediately. And when he couldn't do that, one or two critical American League votes that were going to vote to keep the Senators in D.C. ended up voting to allow Short to move the team.
Okay. What stands to mind for me with the Senators of that era is that within a very short period of time, two managers that stand out to me, Gil Hodges and Ted Williams, iconic baseball people, got to manage Washington, and it set up a rift between Ted Williams and Gil Hodges, which later, from what I understand, contributed to Ted or Gil not ever being elected to the Hall of Fame. I don't know that there was any real rift between them, and B, I don't think that issue would have kept Gil Hodges out of the Hall of Fame. What I do know is that Ted Williams, his first season managing the Senators, he had them in the pennant race for much of the season. In fact, he was named Manager of the Year in the American League. But then Short was making several very dubious deals that weakened the team. The classic one was when he got Denny McLain from the Tigers and had no inkling that McLain's shoulder was completely shot. And McLain and Williams did not get along, and McLain ended up pitching a very long, uncomfortable season, and I think he led the American League in losses that year. And nobody bothered doing their homework and discovering that McLain had a dead shoulder. Beforehand, yeah. I've long since learned the reason why McLain's shoulder went down the tubes. Whatever else anybody's read about Denny McLain, the real cause of his disappearance in baseball came down to something that happened in 1965 when he was still with the White Sox. He felt a pop in his right shoulder in a game. He got a cortisone shot. McLain became almost addicted to cortisone. He took it practically any time he felt his shoulder ailing, and that would be a lot of times, especially with the workload he had in Detroit, especially in 68 and 69. And he kept depending on cortisone, and what he and a lot of medical people did not realize at the time was that cortisone taken too frequently could weaken your bone and tendon structure, as well as eventually cause you possible visual trouble, such as happened to former Met Bill Dennehy. And McLain today will tell you, how did he put it once? Back then it was win one for the Gipper. Well, F the Gipper. He learned the hard way that cortisone can be dangerous to you as well as a temporary palliative. As a matter of fact, sound medical opinion today will tell you that you should have no more than 10 cortisone shots per lifetime. Whoa! If you want to take cortisone without big risks, 10 per lifetime. Ernie Broglio is another one who ended up
with arm and shoulder trouble because of cortisone. And before he died, he told a story that he had once gone to a doctor. This is after his playing career. He went to a doctor and mentioned how many cortisone shots he had gotten during his career. He'd gotten them a lot in 63 and 64. And when he told the doctor how many, the doctor said, "That's 2 lifetimes."
Whoa. Well, you mentioned Jim Dennehy. He was traded.
Bill Dennehy. He was traded. He was traded to allow the Mets to take Gil Hodges as their manager.
Right. It's amazing.
The Senators insisted on a player, and he became the player.
He became the player. I did a show with Bill Dennehy. He has not had an easy life. And
no, he hasn't. You and me did that show together.
Oh, okay. All right. Wow. You know, I've got 2,500 offerings archived on YouTube. So if I forgot that you were in that interview, excuse me.
That's okay. Oh, no need to apologize.
You've been a terrific addition. Tell me a little bit about, tell the audience a little bit about Thornberry Fields Forever.
Well, I have been writing baseball on the internet for the better part of just about 20 years. And when I had to change my blog host, I decided I wanted a different name for it. And I remembered, that I had seen the original Mets live and in person in the Polo Grounds, and everything you ever heard about them was more than true. They really did have Abbott pitching to Costello with who the hell's on first, what the hell's on second, you don't want to know is on third, and you don't even want to think about it's at shortstop. And Marv Thornberry was the anti-hero of the 1962 Mets. And when I was making this transition, I happened to be listening to the Beatles' Magical Mystery Tour album, and Strawberry Fields Forever is on that, and then it just hit me in the face. Thornberry Fields Forever.
Whoa, what great timing. Did you ever have a time when you were tempted not to be a Mets fan?
Having been a Met fan since the day they were born, it's almost possible to say that 9 out of 10 days it was tempting not to be a Met fan.
Ah, good. We all have had
but I
that.
did say tempting. I managed for better or worse to resist temptation.
Me too, but it hasn't been easy. They have disappointed in so many ways.
They have, but usually I get way more PO'd at their administrations than I ever do at the players on the field.
Oh, you can't get mad at the players. They're just doing their job, and the only ones I get mad at are the ones that Ron Davis, who's a blogger on Facebook and a big Met fan, says this. He says, the players that don't want to go back to the minors for help and maybe have it in their contract that they can't be shipped out, and when it comes to going back for a little tutelage, a little recovery, they resist it. And Ron says those are the only players that he roots against for the Mets. In other words, if you're not going to take that team effort, put your ego aside, he doesn't want to be your fan. That makes sense to me.
I understand that. I understand that feeling, but then I try to look at it from inside the player's head to whatever extent I can get inside of it. And sometimes it's an ego thing. No question about it. Sometimes it's a question of pride, which is quite a bit different from ego, even though a lot of people don't think about that. But A lot of times it's a question of pride. A lot of times there are reasons behind it that we don't always know, but people speculate and make their assumptions, and those are the ones that get published.
Right.
So really realistically, there's also the question of the player may be out, or the team may be out of or running very low on minor league options, and both sides know it.
Right, and then the agents get involved at times as well.
Sometimes they do. Sometimes they do. Most of the time, it seems to me, it's between the player and the team, and unless things are spelled out clearly enough, there's a lot of gray area in there, and it's into that gray area, I think, that assumptions get made and misinterpretations or misunderstandings come forth.
Okay. Let me ask you this. What do you like about today's game in comparison to the game that you grew up watching when you were 10, 11, and 12? What do you like about it? Most people, most fans, it was great then, and if we could only go back, this, that, and the other thing. Well, it wasn't all great.
I've been hearing that since I was 12 years old. Oh, God, how many old-timers did I hear, old-time fans did I hear when I was growing up saying that even in the 60s, this wasn't real baseball compared to the real game we grew up watching in the Roaring 20s or during the Depression. So that sort of thing I tend to stay away from because it happens every generation, and I will be willing to bet you that 20 years from now, there will be people looking back and saying today's game was better than whatever the game is going to be then. And today's game has a major problem, and its name is Rob Manfred.
Okay, the commissioner.
That's what I don't like about today's game. Do you remember when George Scott was a Milwaukee Brewer, and he told the Brewers then owner Ed Fitzgerald, quote, if we're going to win, the players got to play better, the coaches got to coach better, the managers got to manage better, and the owners got to own better. To that, I would add, the commissioner got to commission better. This commissioner got to commission better, and I don't think he can.
Well, I think
Rob Manfred looks upon the game and sees and goes to
Manfred's experiments with rule changes is maddening.
The one rule change that makes complete sense is the one that Manfred can't let himself pull the permanent trigger on without trying to compel a quid pro quo from the players that would be intolerable. And that is the universal designated hitter. It should not be tied to anything like the permanently expanded postseason, and I have a lot to say about that.
Mm-hmm.
The universal DH is an idea whose time is long overdue, way overdue. And why he is trying, and the owners are trying to tie this to quid pro quos from the players, boggles the mind until you remember that as much as neither side would like to admit it, they don't always understand that the common good of the game is beyond merely making money for it. And if they were interested in the common good of the game, the universal designated hitter would have been brought in several years ago.
Okay. I happen to disagree. I think it's a wonderful thing to have the DH in the American League and no DH in the National League. I think
I can't understand why. I can't understand why, since the DH was originally a National League idea.
It might have been a National League idea, but I know
there's no might have been. It is true. It is fact. It happened The idea was born in 1891 when the owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates looked upon his pitching staff, noticed that there was one group of 5 of them who went to the plate 510 times, collected 78 hits and 473 official at-bats for a collective batting average among them of 165. And that staff included Hall of Famer Pud Galvin. William Chase Temple was the owner in question, and after that season, he began arguing that it's useless to have the pitchers at the plate. As a matter of fact, the 1891 pennant winner in the National League, the Boston Bean Eaters, you know them today as the Atlanta Braves, they won the pennant, and their main pitching staff hit worse than the Pirates staff did. They hit 127.
Well,
Temple brought his idea to the next meeting of the National League's Rules Committee of the time, and it would have passed had it not been for an owner whose team was joining the league after the ancient American Association folded. That was the owner of the St. Louis Browns. That's the franchise that's been known since 1900 as the St. Louis Cardinals. But for that vote, the designated hitter would have come in. Now, fast forward to 1906. There was a catcher on that 1891 Pirate team who had now grown up to manage a team in the American League. He got tired of watching his pitching staff swinging like their bats were made of cardboard paper roll tubes. There were some A's pitchers who got into 22 games or more, and they hit a collective 201. That catcher turned manager was Connie Mack.
Whoa.
Now, he proposed it for the American League, and the league turned him down. 22 years later, the president of the National League proposed it, and this time the American League said no. But for the historical record, the designated hitter was born as an idea in the mind of a National League executive. Because the pitchers can't hit collectively. The pitchers you see who can swing the bat have always been outliers. Let me tell you what the pitchers' batting averages were at the end of each decade from the 19-teens through the first decade of the aughts. 1920, their batting average was 202. 1930, 214. 1940, at the end of that decade, 179. 1950, 178. 1960, 155. 1970, 146. 1980, 156. 1990, 138. 2000, 148. 2010, 141. Now, I will stake my life on the fact that if you were to find me a position player who hit that futilely, he wouldn't have a job even if he was Mark Belanger at shortstop.
Good comparison. There was a guy with absolutely no bat, but was an amazing fielder. Very underrated.
I believe the only reason Mark Belanger is not in the Hall of Fame is because he couldn't hit if you handed him a garage door. Now, let me share a quote with you. This was published almost 3 years ago. Quote, "It's fun to see Max Scherzer slap a single to right field and run it out like he thinks he's Ty Cobb. But I'll sacrifice that pleasure to get rid of the thousands of rallies I've seen killed when an inning ends with one pitcher working around a competent number 8 hitter so he can then strike out the other pitcher. When you get in a jam in the American League, you must pitch your way out of it, not pitch around your way out of it." That was Thomas Boswell.
That's a great quote. Let me talk to you a little bit about baseball lore. If it weren't for the lack of the designated hitter, Dick Stewart and Marv Thornberry wouldn't stand out as they do in baseball's history.
Actually, if there had been the designated hitter, they might have had longer careers.
They might have, and I don't think that would have.
Who's the white guy? I heard invalid option.
Right. I think it's a matter of you got to have a glove to make the Hall of Fame, and I think.
Well, would you like to know some Hall of Famers who didn't really have gloves, but they got there anyway? How about a second baseman who was constantly in the negative for run prevention, and yet he swung his way into the Hall of Fame? Shake hands with Rogers Hornsby.
I didn't know he was that bad a fielder, and
he was barely a league average fielder, but he could flat out hit.
Well, then Jeff Kent should be in the Hall of Fame.
I don't know about Kent. I think the jury is still out on him. I have a feeling that if he's going to make it, he's going to make it by way of one of the Eras committees, because Kent, among other things, was not the most well-liked individual in the game when he played.
No, by a long shot.
And he was often considered as much of a clubhouse headache as a clubhouse asset. I suspect that he's going to be going to one of the Eras committees to reconsider his case. One, don't get me wrong, but I think that's what's going to be his fate in the long run.
How about some of the great hitting pitchers like Don Newcomb, Bob Lemon? They come to mind for me.
Absolute outliers. Absolute outliers. Yeah. Bob Lemon's career was in the 40s. Bob Lemon's career was in the 40s and the 50s, right?
Right.
The pitchers at the end of the 40s had hit 178. At the end of the 50s, they'd hit 155. Lemon and Newcomb especially were outright outliers. In the 60s, Don Drysdale was the outlier of them all as far as being a hitter. And at the end of that decade, the pitchers had hit 146.
Well,
which, by the way, was 108 points below the major league batting average.
Sacrificed guys over and served their team that way. There were good bunters and bad bunters. Bunting was a skill. It's totally disappeared.
Bunting is a waste.
Okay.
Bunting is a waste, except for a couple of situations, which I will be more than happy to outline for you. And I discovered that, I figured this out while I was writing about Brian Snitker of the Braves getting his contract extension. Snitker does not like to bunt, and I don't blame him, because it's a wasted out. You don't waste outs. Outs are as precious in baseball as jadeite is on the mineral market. There are only 3 times you should want anyone to even think about bunting. Time number 1, against one of those defensive overshifts. They leave your guy at the plate, acres of virgin frontier, let him bunt. Hell, then you order him to bunt. You tell him you'll shoot him doornail if he doesn't bunt, because you show me a bunt onto that kind of delicious wilderness, I'll show you a man on first at minimum on the house. They're full of to open that territory to you, take advantage of it. Show me enough bunts like those in that situation, I'll show you the pending end of the overshifts. Time number 2, if you know they've got infielders with weak throwing arms or concrete for hands, bunt. Come to think of it, if they have infielders like that, you ought to be wondering whether their GMs are Mr. Magoo. And time number 3, if the other guys smell bunt and they put the old rotation play on. You remember that play? The corner base fielders come charging down the line. The middle infielders go charging to the corner bases. It was that kind of fake bunt that Jesse Orozco turned into a 6-hop single up the pipe to send a second insurance home run in Game 7 of the '86 World Series. But if they're putting the wheel play on, you show the bunt, and as soon as the ball leaves that pitcher's hand, you start thinking swing on it. Just put the bat on the ball, get yourself a base hit, all the way up that abandoned middle. Those are the only 3 times you should be thinking about bunting.
Doesn't the DH take away from that strategy that you're just talking about and the possibilities?
Actually, the DH gives you different strategic options. Think about this. What people don't understand as too often about strategy, quote unquote, is that most strategy is thought of before the game begins. Now, with the DH, you want to know what kind of new options you might get? Think about this. You have a DH instead of having them to send your pitcher up and possibly blow a rally on you. Now, guess what you can think about? You have options with a good 9-hitter lineup. You can stick a second cleanup hitter into the number 9 hole. You could put an extra leadoff type style hitter in that slot because, and here's something else we often forget about, the so-called leadoff hitter, he may not lead off every time he comes to the plate. Now, let's say he's due to bat second in the inning. The number 9 hole is due to bat first. How delicious would it be to have another leadoff hitter there? Or at least another leadoff style hitter there. 2
Good
table
point.
setters for the price of 1. Or 3 if you count that number 2 hitter.
Good point. The A's used Louis Polonia in that way. I remember.
Yes, it's been done before. It was done quite a few times recently by teams like the Rays. I think the Cubs tried that a couple of times.
Okay. Well, how about
the new options could almost be unlimited with that. And if you want to talk about strategy, think about this. You have no DH. You've got a starting pitcher who's doing reasonably well, but guess what? You've got a rally going in the 4th or 5th inning, and your starting pitcher is doing very well on the mound, but now you've got men on base, a chance to break a game open, but you've got 2 outs and your pitcher is coming up. Do you really want to take that pitcher out of the game that soon when he's reasonably cruising in favor of possibly yeah, you get those runs, but you have to go to the bullpen sooner than you wanted to, and you run the risk of losing the advantage you just got.
Good point. Very good point. What do you like about today's game?
Well, remove the free cookie on second base to start each extra half inning. Knock it off with this 3-batter minimum for relief pitchers. And I think I'd still like today's game. It's still basically the same game, even if too many hitters are going up to the plate trying to hit 6-run homers every time they swing. But the game today still is pretty much the game we all grew up with, though. I do notice that this season, and maybe the partially deadened ball has something to do with it, but I noticed that a lot of hitters are thinking about contact first instead of distance. They're still getting their home runs. And they're putting balls in play. Basically, it's really the same game. Pitcher throws to hitter. Hitter tries to hit the ball. Hitter swings and misses, or hitter grounds out, or hitter flies out, or hitter gets a hit. It's the same nine guys in the field against that one hitter, and the managers still have their little tricks and ideas that they can put into place during a game. It's still the thinking person's sport, even if there are not thinking people administering it. But Rob Manfred has either got to commission better or has got to go.
Okay. What do you miss most about the game when you were a kid?
To tell you the truth, I can't think of anything that I really miss because it's still essentially at bottom the game we grew up with. It's still 3 strikes, you're out. It's still 4 balls to take your base. Pitchers are still throwing ungodly fastballs and curveballs and other breaking balls.
Okay.
And if you don't count the fact that we have the wild card system, we still have pennant races. Manfred would have put the kibosh on that once and for all if he had managed to keep that ungodly expanded postseason from last year, which was a unique circumstance, I understand. But if he makes that kind of postseason permanent, we already have a problem with watching the thrills, chills, and spills of teams fighting to the last breath to finish in second place. That expanded postseason, we could have had, in theory, 2 teams with losing records in the World Series.
Well,
do baseball fans really want to see that? Haven't you gotten fed up with watching the pennant races and staying on edge to see who's going to finish in second place?
Yeah.
And doesn't the expanded postseason do little more than validate the tanking teams in their thought that they don't have to try that hard? If you want to get rid of the tankers, Don't even think about an expanded postseason. Hell, if I had my way and I was the commissioner, I'd get rid of the wild cards.
I'll tell you how to get rid of the tankers. You make it like soccer. There are soccer leagues playing where the say the two worst teams in the league get demoted to becoming a minor league team, and they bring up two teams to take their place. So
that might have worked before the realignment of the minor leagues as it is, but I've got a better way to get rid of the tankers.
Okay.
And I'll tell you what it is. I've talked about it before in my writings, but I'll say it again. You want to get rid of the tankers? Get rid of the wild card system. This is what you do. You have 3 division leagues, right? When the season is over and you see those 3 teams sitting in first place, the first place finisher with the best record gets a round 1 bye. The other 2 play a best of 3 division series. Then the bye team meets the winner of that set in a best of 5 league championship series. Then the World Series stays best of 7 and its primacy is returned. No wild cards, no lack of incentive to finish in first place. You either finish first or you're home for the winner. Watch the tankers change their tunes.
Would there be less fans involved in the pennant race?
There would be. I think there would be more, not just involved in the pennant race, but with the types of postseason series I just outlined, the postseason saturation factor would be reduced by about 90%. You know the complaint about there's too many postseason games? The way I see it, and the way I outlined it, you wouldn't have that problem anymore. The World Series would mean something again. It'd be the only best of 7 postseason set. You would not have the saturation factor.
Maybe they could play it during the day once in a while and build up some kids' interest and future fan base.
I'd be all in favor of playing the World Series in the day on the weekends. It would be difficult during the week because not just kids are in school and people are working, but on the weekends I would see nothing whatsoever wrong with playing the postseason games during the day, as quite a few of them are. But I'd like to see that come back to the World Series. For the weekend games, play them during the day.
Well, I say the weekdays were exciting when we were kids. Just going to school with the radio up. They
were, but the problem is that life conditions have unfortunately changed those years.
Yeah.
And if we must accommodate to them, that's why I suggested I've got no problem with night games or even games with 5 o'clock starts on the weekdays, but let the weekend games be day games. Let Friday, Saturday, and Sunday games be day games in the postseason.
That your theory makes sense. I like rapping with you because you think outside of the proverbial box. How about that?
Well, baseball has had more outside the box thinking over its long life than people really understand. I really have to laugh at these so-called purists who say everything was better without this or that and the other thing, and they forget that this, that, and the other thing was a change in the first place. And to the ones who say, "Where's the respect for tradition?" Isn't it true that baseball has gotten rid of some traditions that were far better gotten rid of? Did anybody really want to keep the tradition of segregation before 1947 in baseball? I don't think so.
Very good point. Very good point.
Baseball has changed tradition baseball's been changing tradition as long as catchers began wearing shin guards and using padded mitts, which, by the way, they didn't use before. I think it was sometime in the 1890s. And everybody who wants to argue against technology in baseball, hey, where were you guys when the first electric scoreboards started showing up? What did you think about that?
Good, very good point. Very good point.
I often get the impression that these traditionalists, quote unquote, and these purists, quote unquote, would not be happy unless baseball was back to the dead ball era.
Well, were it not for the obsession with home runs and the long ball, I might agree with you. Time is short. Tell us your impression of baseball's true phenomena of the 2001 season or 2021 season, and that's O Junta with your beloved California Angels. Tell me about him and how far.
You mean Ohtani?
Ohtani. I have a habit of pronouncing everybody's name wrong, and then when I get it right, we can have a block party. But
don't feel bad about it. Casey Stengel used to call a certain Yankee first base prospect Joe Pepperoni.
That's very funny. And
that's when he wasn't mistaking one player for another player.
Right. But
Shohei Ohtani.
I don't have Casey's pedigree, so I'm going to just rely on you for the pronunciation. And do you, like me, feel that this guy is special?
He's singular. He's unique. He's the outlier of outliers in the fact that he can pitch and he can hit well enough to be a position player or a DH. But again, this guy is a total outlier, a hugely talented one, and we'll see what happens with him if he gets a full season to go both ways. He hasn't really had that yet because of his elbow issues and things like that. But let's take a look at him again when this season is over and see what he has done and take it from there, because right now this guy is the outlier of outliers.
Okay. That's a good terminology, the outlier of outliers. Thank you for coming on once again and gracing us. It's always a pleasure. We'll follow.
It's a pleasure to talk to you too.
We'll follow Ohtani's career together. I have a place in my heart for the Angels since 1961, when I was jonesing for a team to love so much. When the Angels were born, they had New York Giant uniforms. They had New York Giant uniforms and San Francisco Giant uniforms inspired by Bill Rigney. And another former Giant at that time was their pitching coach, Marv Grissom, in their first year.
It's funny you mentioned the 61 Angels. I've been wearing their hat during this conversation. I have a good replica of their Season 1 hat in the American League when it was the old L.A. intertwined logo, but they didn't have the halo on top. They didn't put the halo on top until 1962.
Right.
And I have one of the halo hats.
I have a collection of hats. Many Angel caps are included, but my favorite logo is the CA on the Angels.
I've got to get me one of those. I also have a 1962 Baltimore Orioles with that nicely styled body bird and the orange visor.
Yeah. I, like you, change caps maybe 3 or 4 or 5 different times during the day. Who I'm talking to.
No, I'm not that crazy. I don't change them that often during the day.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm that crazy and more. Thank you again, and we will be back before you know it. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. This has been a great show. Please come back soon.
Thank you for having me again.
Okay. And if you're listening in the audience, do us both a favor. We put on a pretty good show for you. I put on a good producing show. I produced it. Gather up some lightly used children's books and take them over, put them in a big box, get your neighbors to contribute, take them over to the Head Start program in whatever community you live in, and those books will be put to use. Kids need to learn to read. They need to develop a passion. They need to get ahead, and the Head Start program will put those books into kids' hands. So do something great for yourself and for the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. And thank you for listening, everybody. Happy trails. Adios.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned Network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.